Good evening, everyone. The time is 7 p.m. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Development Committee meeting. Can I please have a roll call?
Sulkitis.
Here.
Folks.
Here.
Bungard.
Here.
Munns.
Here.
Spellman.
Here.
Gem.
Here.
Petrilla.
Here.
Bessner.
Here.
Weber.
Here.
Werball. Okay. First up is the omnibus vote. I need a motion and a second to approve.
Munns move.
Weber will second.
Moved by Munns, seconded by Weber. Can I have a roll call, please?
Sulkitis.
Yes.
Folks.
Yes.
Bungard.
Yes.
Munns.
Yes.
Spellman.
Yes.
Gem.
Yes.
Petrilla.
Yes.
Bessner.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Okay. So first up is under Community and Economic Development is item 4A, a presentation regarding short-term rentals. Russell Colby will be presenting along with Jenna Sawicki. Go ahead, Russ.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. This will be an informational presentation regarding short-term rentals in St. Charles. Short-term rentals, if you're not familiar with services like Airbnb or VRBO, they are offerings of residential properties, either for nightly or weekly stays, generally less than 30 days. They're typically offered fully furnished with other amenities, and they're used by tourists, business travelers, families, similar to a hotel. Some of the topics I'm going to cover in this presentation, I'm going to walk through zoning regulations, talk about the locations of these single-family rentals, short-term rentals in St. Charles, revenue trends, what regulations exist in some of our neighboring communities, the awareness of these short-term rentals in St. Charles, tourism and promotion opportunity, which Jenna will speak to, and then some options for the committee to consider. So first, some background. The last time the city reviewed short-term rentals was in 2019. At that point, there was a proposal that was put forward after review by the Planning Commission for zoning regulation, also looking at either registry or licensing. And those options were considered at the committee level, but no action was taken. The opinion of the committee at that time was that there was not an interest in imposing any regulations. So the short-term rental activity in St. Charles has grown considerably in recent years based on some of the tracking that we've done, which I'll walk through. And we do receive frequent contacts in community development regarding the city's regulations about short-term rentals, and also the Business Alliance receives contacts from operators seeking services. So this is meant to be an informational update, and then we'll have an opportunity for feedback and direction at the conclusion. But really, this is an opportunity to revisit this topic from a regulatory standpoint if there's an interest by the committee based on having not talked about it since 2019. So zoning regulations for short-term rentals, they're not defined in our zoning ordinance, but generally if a residential unit is rented out for less than 30 days, it could either fall into one of two categories: a bed and breakfast, which is a use that's generally permitted in the downtown area, or a hotel motel, which is mainly permitted in business districts. So when staff receives inquiries about short-term rentals, we inform the callers or emailers that they are not expressly prohibited, but we also have no proactive enforcement against them at this time. So really, if an owner is deciding to operate a short-term rental in a residential district, they're really proceeding at their own risk because it isn't documented anywhere in our codes that it's permitted. So we also can't issue zoning letters approving the use because it isn't anywhere in the city code specifically. So this slide includes information on short-term rentals listings in St. Charles. We were able to compile a list of 47 listings from Airbnb and VRBO, which are the two biggest platforms. And more than half of those are single-family house rentals. Most of them are around the downtown. Not all are in the immediate downtown area, but a lot of them are in the older neighborhoods just on the periphery of downtown into the south towards Geneva. And there's a breakdown here that shows the zoning districts they're located in. About a third of them are around downtown, and then another half of them are in the older neighborhoods around town, and the rest are sort of scattered in more isolated locations. But as you can see from the map, there's quite a concentration along the river and in the older neighborhoods. Revenue trends. So the city has a hotel operators tax. This has not been imposed on short-term rentals, but if that rate, if it were to be applied to short-term rentals, could potentially generate a fair amount of hotel tax revenue. This chart here shows some information on revenue trends that have occurred over the past 5 years. This is from a service that provides data on short-term rentals, which Jenna will also talk about. And you can see the trend line year after year. There's been pretty significant growth in the revenue that's being generated. And this year is also trending up about 25% versus last year. You can see that potential tax revenue, if this tax was to be imposed on short-term rentals, for last year would have been about $72,000. So staff reviewed short-term rental rules and regulations in some neighboring municipalities. And in general, there is not a consistent trend. Some have pretty heavy restrictions and others really don't regulate them at all. So on the list on the right, we have some municipalities that prohibit them, some allow them, but with quite a few restrictions. Municipalities that have either a business or rental license are using those licensing programs to approve short-term rentals. But then also two of our neighbors, South Elgin and Geneva, both don't have any regulations of short-term rentals. We also found that the hotel tax is being imposed by some municipalities, including Naperville, Schaumburg, and Geneva, in a range that's comparable to our hotel tax. Yeah, this slide includes examples of some of the types of restrictions that have been placed on short-term rentals in other municipalities. So these would be conditions either that are incorporated into their code or part of their licensing program. But there's a whole list of potentially grandfathering existing short-term rentals when codes are imposed, requiring that a short-term rental be operated like a traditional bed and breakfast only, requiring that there be a primary residence for an owner before it's offered as a short-term rental, minimum stay length of 2 or 3 days, adjacency to other zoning if it's in a residential district, requiring the owner to be present, limitations on not renting out an entire unit, restrictions against corporate ownership, requiring a separation distance between short-term rentals, one of the codes at 750 feet, a notice requirement to neighbors when they're established, hearing process to establish them, some types of occupancy limits on the size of the number of individuals who could be able to rent the short-term rental, and then parking regulations in terms of where individuals could park when they're staying at a short-term rental. So all of these have been imposed to different degrees by other municipalities. And so community awareness, most of the communities that have regulations have enacted them in response to complaints that they've received. In general, in St. Charles, we have not received many complaints since the 2019 update on this topic, although we have had a recent incident that has generated a number of complaints that's in an RS-zoned area in the 2nd Ward. And so that has also prompted us to look at these regulations. But in general, short-term rentals, they don't appear to be disruptive in older neighborhoods, at least based on our complaint records. These are areas generally that have a mix of different housing types. They have more rental units. They also have more activities and visitors on a consistent basis. So the types of activities associated with a short-term rental may not stand out much more than the typical activity in the neighborhood. In subdivisions outside of downtown, they have the potential to attract more attention. Residents may view the activity that's associated with short-term rentals being inconsistent with the character of the neighborhood that they live in, because it's a different type of activity than they may see normally. Now, most residents, I think, are familiar with short-term rentals just from their own experiences in them. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jenna to talk about tourism and promotion opportunities.
So I'm going to just speak to the tourism side of short-term rentals. Like Russ had said, our organization has been approached several times by current Airbnbs in St. Charles asking for help promoting them. However, due to how we're funded through hotel motel tax, we are currently unable to promote them and do not have them listed on our website. I do just want to show, this is one of our communities that we look up to and kind of compare ourselves to. It's Traverse City, and this is their website. I just wanted to show you a snapshot from their website. As you can see, they actively promote their short-term rentals, which enhance a visitor choice and accessibility. It highlights a complete tourism environment and drives traffic to all business districts. It also helps position the city as a travel destination, bringing in visitors who contribute to the local economy. So on the next two slides, I pulled some data and figures from AirDNA, which is a data and analytical platform that tracks short-term rentals listed from Airbnb and VRBO. It provides insights on things like occupancy rates, nightly rates, bookings, trends, and total revenue. Cities and DMOs like us typically use AirDNA to understand how short-term rentals are performing, where they're located, how they impact tourism, housing, and the local economy. Some of my staff and the community development staff recently did a demo on AirDNA. If the city was to move forward with any sort of short-term rental tax collection, it may be worth investing in this platform to access real-time data. The subscription fee could be covered by the revenue collected by the tax. As you can see in front of you, the number of short-term rental listings in city proper has steadily grown. Visitors using short-term rentals are choosing St. Charles for weddings, family gatherings, events, and weekend getaways. These are people who want to spend time and money in our community. So the average short-term rental, you can say it a lot, it'll trip you up eventually. The average short-term rental guest stays longer than a hotel guest. That's by 72% longer. According to AirDNA and national averages, short-term rental visitors spend more per day than hotel guests, and they tend to spend like locals. They shop and dine and explore. This drives revenue for local restaurants, shops, service providers, and attractions, especially in neighborhoods beyond the normal hotel corridor. St. Charles hotel inventory will often reach capacity during events and weddings, so these provide essential overflow during peak weekends that are often the only option for larger families or for longer stays. From our research, short-term rentals are part of a healthy, diversified tourism strategy, and they help welcome more visitors without needing to build more infrastructure. Offering a variety of lodging options, including short-term rentals, helps us to stay competitive with neighboring towns and retain visitor spending. It fits well with the city's goal to encourage travel, hosting great events, and supporting local businesses. And then here are a few photos I just pulled from Airbnb and VRBO. These are all current short-term rental listings in St. Charles. I just wanted to give you a sense of what they typically look like. Also, just to get ahead of an anticipated question, this is a snapshot from the STAR report. For background, the STAR report is a tool used in the hotel industry to compare a hotel's performance. It helps groups like us understand their performance in key metrics like occupancy, average daily rate, and RevPAR. As you can see, hotel occupancy is up year over year, which should help ease any concerns about potential negative impacts. Based on our research and data from AirDNA, those who choose short-term rentals and those who choose hotels often represent different demographics or are simply seeking a different type of experience. Many of you have likely stayed at both over the past few years, depending on your specific travel needs. What we're seeing in St. Charles is that there is a demand for both, which supports a more well-rounded tourism ecosystem.
Yeah, so a few considerations and observations to offer based on this information. So the short-term rental activity in St. Charles is growing. It's been growing year after year. But right now they do operate in somewhat of a gray area under our code because they're not specifically allowed or prohibited. So our enforcement has been limited really to our normal code enforcement process, and there's complaints about issues that are observed. But also, without having the hotel tax in place and having information on these listings, we're really not taking advantage of potential revenue or tourism benefits that could be offered if we don't more formalize they're part of our tourist economy. So we're seeking any direction on whether to consider code updates relative to short-term rentals. Depending on that direction, the follow-up steps would be to review those options from a legal standpoint, determine what the appropriate process would be for code updates, and then contact the unit owners and operators once we have a concept of what we'd be proposing. So on this final slide, I'm going to walk through some options that the committee could consider. And these could be considered individually or in combination. But first, what staff would propose is that we potentially amend the code to make short-term rentals a permitted use in the downtown area. And this could be taking our existing bed and breakfast use definition and modifying it. Right now it has some limitations that make it somewhat difficult to meet the requirement. And by having this identified in the downtown zoning districts, it would really encourage investors to look at that as a business model to establish new short-term rentals within the downtown. Because right now it is somewhat unclear if you're going to be creating a new project that includes short-term rentals, how that would be categorized. Second option is to regulate the location of short-term rentals throughout the city. So this would be looking at potentially different zoning districts where they might be permitted, looking at the downtown area versus the RT traditional zoning districts, which are the older neighborhoods, versus the RS suburban zoning districts, which are the relatively newer neighborhoods. Looking at those areas differently because they have different purpose statements and kind of different character. Third option, imposing the tax similar to the hotel operators tax, like was referenced in the presentation. This would likely be similar to what's paid by hotels, but it could be collected by listing services if we're able to have those automatically collected. And this would then open up the business alliances services to the short-term rental hosts. Another option related, and I think would go along with the hotel operators tax, would be to create a registry of short-term rental property manager contacts and listings. That's what the business alliance could use to have listings that they promote, and also be a tool for the city to utilize to get in contact with property owners or managers about issues that may come up. And finally, there's the option of considering a license program for short-term rentals, and this would be a program that would incorporate some standards for location, operation management, so that there was some type of approval process to have one established, and the ability to potentially rescind that license if there's certain issues that are identified based on criteria that need to be developed and put into the code. So these are options that we open to receiving feedback on.
Okay, Russell, thank you for the presentation. Jenna, thank you. So let's take some questions, comments.
May I ask if we can take public comment from people who are here to discuss this before council?
Since we're not taking any action or voting, I'd rather have us ask the questions and it may be answered as we go through this. So
will we give them an option to
absolutely.
speak before we make a recommendation? Okay.
Yeah.
I have a couple
Vicki, go ahead.
Thank you. One, I was just a detail question. I noticed that it said that Naperville prohibits short-term rentals, but then there also was a note that they charge a tax on the same slide. Who's the tax?
Yeah, so it's prohibited against short-term rentals in residential districts, but there are still some operators of units that are considered short-term rentals under their, like an Airbnb offering, so it's still collected through that service.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then my other question is there any legal liability to us not licensing or monitoring short-term rentals in the city?
You know, that's a complicated question to answer. You know, as it exists today, it's not identified in the code. And, you know, there's different arguments about how it might be classified. You know, if it's part of a residential use versus is it a commercial use, and is it the principal use of a property, or is it an occasional use of a property that's being used for another purpose? So, absent those categories, you know, from an enforcement standpoint, we have a challenge then really identifying specifically what it is. And so, from a legal standpoint, you know, I think if there's an attempt to you know, impose some kind of restrictions without having definitions in the code to go along with it, that could put us in a difficult spot legally.
Thank you.
Ed?
Thanks, Russell. In regards to the last three options that you have listed here, what's the one option that, you know, of course the hotel operators tax revenue would be important, at least for myself it would be, but what's the option that would best, you know, claim every residence that's in here?
So I think that If the tax is implemented, it would make sense to create a registry so that we're able to connect those individual property owners and operators with the services that they're paying for and kind of formalize that communication and have a list that the city could utilize. But that wouldn't necessarily be any kind of approval process on the location. It would simply be a way to register so that we know who they are and that we're making sure that they're aware of the services that they're receiving from paying the hotel tax.
So if we collected a hotel tax, we wouldn't know exactly where the locations are?
We would not, because the services, they're able to assess those taxes on the listings, and then basically the tax that's collected is in bulk, and it's just funds that are provided to the city on a monthly basis. We're not able to tell specifically where that tax is paid from a specific location.
And then, are there any parameters that are coming into this presentation that might have come from when we had a renters ordinance like years ago, if you remember that? And the reason why I'm asking that is because there was like a 3-strike law in there for some, I guess, some harder type crimes. But I mean, how can we track, I guess, incidents that might happen that are disruptive? At the very least disruptive, if not.
Yeah, so with, I know there was discussion in the past about a rental residential licensing program.
Right.
In which case then there'd be licenses required for all rental units. So other communities who have imposed regulations on short-term rentals, if they have those programs, they've utilized those programs for short-term rentals. But absent that, we do have the ability to utilize the nuisance abatement procedures that are in our code related to code violations against the property or the occupants. It's a little bit more of a challenge because the occupants change more frequently with a short-term rental, but you can associate it with the property as a way to pursue nuisance abatement, similar to, I think, what that came out of the last discussion about rental licenses. But because we wouldn't have necessarily a license to pull, we wouldn't really be able to stop the property owner from continuing to operate the short-term rental. But it would require them to take steps to come into compliance or otherwise face more significant code enforcement steps.
Maybe fines and all that as well. And then police and fire can come and go in case of an emergency or even a non-emergency. I mean, is there any deviation of what the police or fire can do at a house that's Airbnb or? So
as it exists today, they're essentially the same as any other residential unit.
Sure.
So they're not subject to any type of inspection or any certification because the concept is it's offering what's otherwise a legal residential unit to a short-term renter because we don't necessarily have any system in place that would require any type of further verification of the space or inspection. And
then last question real quick. Is there any thought on capping the number overall throughout the city, at least in a code that we might set up for the next 2 or 3 years to just kind of have a starting point, whether it's east side, west side? I'm not talking, because I'm in favor of going throughout the city. I don't want to restrict it too much, but maybe we could have an east side, west side type of thing.
Yeah, I think with a cap, we generally need to have a license program in place to do that.
Sure.
But there's been other alternatives suggested through regulations where there's a separation distance that essentially imposes kind of a limitation on concentrations of them in a single area is another way to approach it without a license program. But that's the only, a license would really be the only way it could be capped.
Okay. Thank you, Russ.
Steve?
Thank you, Chairman Warball. I don't have any questions per se. I think you really did a good job with the presentation. So I just have some comments. I mean, overall, as you mentioned, we really haven't had too many issues. I personally, we have seven units in our ward, and I haven't heard anything from any of our constituents. But I do definitely feel like we should, for sure, have at least 2 things. Number one, we need to know as a city that there's some kind of a Airbnb or a VRBO there. And then on top of it, because they are competing with our hotels, and it can affect our hotel tax, I would definitely want to incorporate some kind of a hotel tax on these, because it does take revenue away from our hotels. But I don't want to get too complicated with this. I mean, I think down the line, maybe you get into you can kind of restrict numbers, but right now I don't see this being a huge huge issue, but we definitely need to we got to address some of it though, so that's all I got.
Okay. Ron?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I didn't know there were 4 in the first ward. Because I've never, as I said, I've never had a complaint about them. I don't think Mark has either. I would be hesitant to just limit it to the downtown area. We're going to put all of it, we're going to move them all down to one little concentration. I'd have trouble accepting that. And let's just say we did hypothetically limit it to the downtown district, whatever that is. We haven't defined that yet, have we?
No.
What would happen to the units that are already out there that are not in the downtown? Would they be grandfathered in?
We'd have to make a determination on that. That's one option, depending on how the code is structured.
Okay. And then the next thing is, well, I agree with Steve about going overboard with regulations again. But how would we enforce anything that we pass? How are we going to depend on the neighbors to report stuff to us? I mean, how are we going to do it?
Yeah, in terms of being aware of where the units are operating, we have access to more complete information than we did in the past, where we can find the listings of these properties and typically can associate them with some other information that we could collect. You know, for example, the service Air DNA that provides data on these locations, there's additional contact information associated with it, and other information we could determine where it's operating. So if we were to impose some types of restrictions or have a registry, we'd be able to identify listings that show up in those services that we don't otherwise have a registry listing for. So we would be able to track the information. It would take a little bit of effort, but we would be able to track the information. But it'd be similar to, you know, if we have a business move into an area that is operating and doesn't comply with zoning. You know, we have to follow a process to enforce the code. And we typically hear about those a lot of times based on complaints or kind of secondhand information about a question or a concern.
I don't have any problem charging a fee or a tax, whatever it is. There's a point about for competition with the hotels. I think level the field out there. And say, are there any problems in Geneva that you've heard of since they don't re-regulate it at all? Have you heard anything or?
You know, there's a lot of listings there similar to as there are here, but I'm not aware that they've had significant enough issues to want to propose any type of regulation.
No. You have the number here of whatever, forgot the total, but are there
47.
Are there any out there that just do it themselves?
That we don't know.
You know, and I don't know if you would know unless some neighbor said there's a lot of.
Yeah, so right now there's 2 major services, but there's also some other smaller services that could be tracked, but that is possible.
Okay.
I think the difference is, you know, utilizing these services, they tend to be marketed more consistently throughout the year to where the property is being operated in that manner, versus someone who might be, you know, utilizing more informal channels to do it occasionally.
Okay. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Russ. I guess I'm looking at this like, I don't know if we have a problem yet, but I want to solve something before we do down the road. I think like down the road before something pops, like you're saying. I appreciate you here tonight asking for direction, and I wish I had that magic answer. I love these options. I think we need a starting point somewhere, and that's where I'm wondering kind of where that is, but I agree with Alderperson Weber, like, this is something that should be taxed because if they're taking away from our hotels and that is, I think that is not a good thing. I would love to know the number. I'd love to know where. I'd love to make sure they're compliant. So that's where I'm like, where do we begin? And I know you're asking us for direction, but I'm kind of asking back, like, where is a logical place for us to begin so we can get some parameters in place before major problems in neighborhoods continually occur. So that's kind of what I'm looking for moving forward, but I love these options. I think imposing the tax similar, the registry is great. I mean, maybe it's all of them. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we got to cut this off before some type of problems in some type of neighborhoods come up where residents don't feel either safe or they're realizing, hey, this isn't what we wanted to move into, type of a thing.
Ryan?
So we do have a big problem in the second ward. So I'm happy to hear that other wards aren't seeing this, but we do have one big problem. So we have 3 hotels in the second ward. So how do we have a hotel? Remind us the zoning, regulations. How do we have a hotel that's right next to a school? Like, what are the restrictions on? Because obviously there's restrictions on what you can build in terms of, and I'll lead to my question. But what are the restrictions?
So for like a commercial hotel?
Right.
So it depends on the zoning district that it's located in. If that zoning district listed as a permitted use, it's permitted use to be developed there.
So I would assume that you've got, some commercial protections, but the problem we have in the second ward is you've got one particular property that has children passing every single day, standing by a bus. You've got no idea of visibility who's coming and going in this house. And I'm just curious, if you can't restrict, hotels because of the zoning and their proximity to schools, certainly with single-family homes and neighborhoods, it would seem logical that this should be something we restrict, because I can't control who's staying there. There's no registry, there's no regulation, and I don't want to go down the what-if scenarios, but it would seem logical that while I don't want to restrict, a potential business owner, somebody from making a living and how they're using the property, at the same time, if I buy my house and a year later it's turned into a hotel and my kids are walking down the street, this isn't what I signed up for. So to Mark's point, we do have that problem. That problem is already here right now. So somehow, some way, putting some guardrails around, how people utilize these properties, I think it's incredibly important, because it's only a matter of time before there's going to be another situation like this somewhere else in town. So we have other, taxing regarding, hotels. I would be in favor of that, but I'm more curious right now of somebody bought their home in a neighborhood not to live next door to a hotel, and when you start adding in things like the second ward is 95% residential, 90% residential, with a ton of kids getting on school buses, going to schools. When you have schools, mixed into these, I think it changes the question dramatically. So I'm in favor of looking at a much more comprehensive approach, particularly in the second ward as it relates to a lot of the single-family homes.
Before I forget, David, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead.
No, I'm listening to everybody. Thank you again, Russ. In general, yeah, I would be in favor of the staff looking into additional research into this. Generally, just a couple comments. Do support the tax, so the Business Alliance can also do its job and promote, and they can do that. I do also support a registry, and I wouldn't limit it to just the downtown. I think we can be a little more equitable to the entire city. Yeah, if we could start there, and I think that would be a good start.
Okay, thank you. Jamie?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for putting this together, Russ. I know that this request came out of some complaints from our ward and actually it's my street, full disclosure. And I've talked to a lot of the people on our street, and I think so. I'm going to start with a question, and I don't expect you to answer it, but I guess it would just be very simply, why would we say the way that you phrased it in the beginning? Why would we tell a caller, well, we have this ordinance, but we can't enforce it? It just seems like a very odd way to answer a question. Well, we have a rule that there's this boundary for Airbnbs or for beds and breakfasts. This is where you can have those. But, if you were to buy something somewhere else, we can't enforce that. I guess I just don't know why the city would even offer that out to somebody that is asking that question. So I'm just throwing that out there. I wouldn't expect you to answer it for me, but it just seems like something we probably wouldn't want to say, like, well, here's a way to break the rule. I also want to mention that in this presentation and in the agenda, it says that there's only one in the second ward, but that's not accurate because I've done my own searches for Airbnbs and VRBOs, and I have found multiple in the second ward. This is the only one that's a full home that I saw, but there are many others that are partial homes. So I'm not sure, I guess that leads to one of my questions is, how accurate is AirDNA and what actually is the cost of that? And that rolls into another question about the administrative costs of regulation. If we're bringing in a $72,000 tax from those, what do we actually get out of that? Is that a wash? Is it something that we really are getting something out of, or are we just, it's just performative? I don't know if anyone can answer that series of questions.
Yeah, so related to the location, so the data on the locations was just found by staff through looking through the services. AirDNA offered us some summary statistics they were able to use. We didn't have access to their database of the listings.
Oh, okay.
So the listings that we found were ones where we located addresses.
Okay.
You don't always have consistent lists of what's in there, so we don't necessarily know if this is complete. I think of the ones we documented, we came up with one in the second ward.
Okay.
But I feel like I've seen a couple additional in the second ward in the past that were not coming up when we were doing this.
You have to pick the right dates. You have to have the right number of people. It is very tricky to do a search by yourself.
Yeah, so the benefit of AirDNA is that we would have all of those that are active with the services that aren't necessarily posted continuously.
Got it. Okay. I just wanted to make it clear that these numbers might not be accurate. If you're getting 47, we may have double that and not even be aware if that's the case, total in the city.
It's possible. I think probably we missed some, but I wouldn't think it's
maybe not double.
Yeah.
Maybe that's exaggeration. But we really don't know because it is hard to gather that without having.
And on the AirDNA subscription service, I think the range to subscribe to it on a yearly basis is something like $7,000.
Okay.
We had estimated you could collect up to $72,000 based on the data that we saw, and that's assuming that we're not going to have administrative costs associated with doing the collection. If we're able, that's something we need to research. If we're able to get the services to collect that automatically, which they do for other jurisdictions, then theoretically the cost may be minimal for us from an administrative standpoint.
Okay. And what about the cost of licensing as far as the administrative cost and process for that? That would add to that?
Yes. And so they're typically, when we create a program like that, we would utilize the fees that we collect to support the administrative side of the license. So that's something we need to develop and determine what's an appropriate fee. That would be a discussion then of, to what extent is that offset by other costs, maybe from the tax revenue or something else that could cover those costs. That would be a discussion about the program structure. Okay.
And then I wanted to make a comment about the potential for capping the number in a neighborhood. One of the reasons that I would say we should look at that is because while I know that could be difficult, we also have to consider the fact that the more of these that you have in a neighborhood, the more it can impact property values. And I know that you can say they have to be a certain number of feet apart from each other or whatever. There are places around the country that I don't know how exactly they legally do this, but they put restrictions on corporations from purchasing homes to then create Airbnbs or similar types of short-term rentals, because that really does have an impact over time on the property values in the neighborhoods. And I would be concerned if that is something that becomes an issue in the city. I think there are pockets of the city that don't see as many of these because there are homeowners associations. We happen to live in a portion of our neighborhood that does not have one of those. So we don't have any way to restrict this other than through city code. I also think that there's a distinction between a whole home rental and partial homes, because there is a very big difference between, as you mentioned, when there is an owner on site and when there is no owner on site. As a person who stayed in Airbnbs, I can tell you that it's definitely different when you know that there's somebody in the home that lives there. And I would imagine that as a resident that lives around that, you know that you can go to that homeowner and have a personal conversation with them if there's an issue, as opposed to not knowing. We don't know, and I say we because there are some neighbors in the audience today. We don't know this neighbor that owns this building or this home and is renting it out, and we can't have these conversations with them. And the turnover of these tenants is not such that those people would care if we have an issue with them. So I think that is a distinction that should be considered in writing these. That it's less invasive having a partial home rental, so the percentage, like there is with long-term rentals, the percentage of the home matters.
Yeah, and that certainly could be addressed in either zoning regulation or a licensing program. And something similar to that was proposed in 2019, where there would be limitations in certain zoning areas where it's not entire units. So that's certainly something that could be incorporated in any of these proposals.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Thanks. Russ, Jenna, thank you very much for this. I'll speak for myself, Vicki, but we didn't know we had 5 in the 3rd ward, but we'll be on the lookout for them now. But I think to everybody's point, and especially Alderperson Weber, is don't want to make it overly restrictive to start with. As the email we all received said, we have an issue and we're kind of behind. So that's to Alderman folks, is get ahead of it and not make it too restrictive. And I'd like to see how, I'm not sure the mechanism in the slide that showed Geneva had no restriction, but yet they collect the tax. So the tax obviously gets collected to our benefit from Airbnb, VRBO, or any of the other services. I'd also like to see us, to everybody's point, is some sort of registry that know that they're here. And I think that just creates the visibility that we're watching out for those and trying to do what's best for the city as a whole. Much to what David's point was too, is a registry, we're not limited to certain sections, but let's know who they are that are out there. And maybe there's a benefit that we could maybe advertise them a little bit, but then also know who those homeowners are. Is it an individual or an LLC, the documentation that you did? Kind of a different equation, but I think if we keep it that way and let people know that we're watching, and if we can create some economic value to make it even with our hotels and motels, I think that would be a benefit. I don't know how we word all that and with the legality that was mentioned, but I think that would be a good first step for all of us to have something to enforce it, that these kind of operations are being watched. So again, thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Russ, for great information. So thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So I used to own rental property, okay, before I sold it. And there are times when I'd have a 1-year lease, but then they wanted to stay a little longer, so then it goes month to month. Well, would that be considered then a short-term rental? Because it is month to month, even though it's an extension of the original lease.
Yeah, generally, if the rental is for 30 days or more, you're considered to be a resident of that unit and not a temporary or transient guest.
But the lease expires, and you're going month to month, then it's a new lease, and it's a month-to-month lease. So that be considered a short-term lease because it's a 1 month.
No, it wouldn't.
Okay.
It'd be considered like a regular lease, like a month-to-month lease.
Okay, thank you.
Vicki.
I asked questions before, so now I'll just put my 2 cents in on what I'm thinking about all of this. I would definitely be, as of now, in favor of taxing, to be fair to our other businesses in St. Charles, and some sort of zoning. I do think it makes a really big difference to have these sorts of homes in the downtown area where there's already mixed use and a lot of traffic and pedestrian traffic and businesses. But in the more bedroom communities, I think it's much more disruptive to have people coming and going like that, and not what people expected when they purchased their home there. So I would be in favor of some sort of limited zoning, taxing. I feel like licensing is just going to be such a bureaucracy for us, a lot to manage, and would cut into the benefits of having those increased taxes. Just look at the Liquor Commission and how much effort and hours and time goes into managing a fewer number of bars and restaurants licenses. So would love to avoid that. But if we're taxing, then we'll have some, oh, you said no, some way of knowing who they are or where they are. Or if we do zoning, we would.
Yeah, if we had a registry, we would have that information.
That sounds good.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a few comments. So David and I represent the 4th Ward, and we have 29 Airbnbs or rentals, short-term rentals. We've never had a complaint in the entire time, at least my 4 years, and I talked to David in his 6 years. So for us, in our experiences, it's been a very good one with the short-term rentals. So I think a measured approach is the appropriate approach, and I agree with the majority up here with the hotel tax and the registry. I think is a good start to get started and see how it goes from there. But that's where I'm at with it as far as the short-term rentals. So you mentioned is there anything else that you have?
No.
Okay. You mentioned there were some public comments.
I don't know if they want to come up and speak, but I'd like to give them the
If there are any,
opportunity before we,
if there are any public comments on this issue for short-term rentals, you're welcome to come up and speak. Okay. Sir in the back, yeah. Just need your first and last name.
Emil Shaluki. So I live in the 2nd Ward where we have the short-term rental with some of the issues. So we did some research of our own, and we actually found a couple of things that didn't show up in the research that were shown, but I think you guys should be aware of. Northeastern University in Boston did an extensive study on the effects of short-term rentals in suburban and urban areas in the city of Boston, and they found a heavy increase in violent crimes and a reduction in real estate property value until they don't reach a certain amount of percentage of homes that are actually used at short-term rental. The second point is Traverse City. So Traverse City actually has 40% of the eligible housing that is short-term rentals. So it's a very specific and particular example, which I don't think would abide to St. Charles in general terms. And because of the increase of the short-term rentals in the city of St. Charles, you can probably see a trend going more towards the research from Northeastern University in Boston. Still in Traverse City, they had a few problems when it comes to enforcing the actual regulations that were put in place. And there's articles in Record Eagle, local document, and they also had legal disputes and taxation issues with some of the management companies in the area. This is just, the community sentiment is terrible in the city. So this is just to say that I think there are a few more things that should be taken into consideration because of how the trend of the short-term rentals is increasing in the area and what it could eventually mean. The last thing that is very important to our neighborhood, I think, is the fact that there's no background checks. They're not subject to the same regulations against sex offenders. And in our ward, we have 2 schools, if I'm not mistaken. About 3,300 children go to it. And whereas hotels have to do that, there's no way to enforce that for short-term rentals. So I think it's something that should be taken into consideration as well, especially when you're looking at maybe creating some zoning where you might want to apply this. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. First and last name.
Yeah, I'm Andrea Hunsaker. I also live, Jamie's my neighbor. I guess I just wanted to give some sort of insight into what we've been experiencing in our neighborhood. In the last month, I think I've counted 6 different guests in this house, transient people staying there. And we've had, I was walking my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old and walking past the front porch. Someone was sitting on the front porch smoking pot, laying in the backyard in their underwear 2 mornings in a row, I think. Pickup trucks parked in the middle of the street where the police were called, had to come move. Obviously people drinking there, noise issues. It just, I would say in the last month, like my experience in my neighborhood is completely different. And we moved in, it's like the Fox Chase area. Our subdivision has no outlet. They're directly backed up to St. Charles East and Redling Middle School. And our bus stop is in front of our house, and we take our community really seriously. We moved from the city out here so that we could have this sense of community and safety, and now I feel like that's being infringed upon. And I was really disappointed to see that our own community isn't really looking out for us or providing any sort of like safety or parameters like for our kids or our neighborhood or even like the value of our home or our experience. Like we did not buy that house thinking that we were going to be across the street from an Airbnb and not know who's staying there every night. You know, unfortunately, my husband travels for work sometimes, and I'm there by myself with my kids, and now I don't know who's across the street. We had one night I was by myself. There was four or five pickup trucks in the driveway, and all men outside in front of the house. It just doesn't make me feel safe and secure in my own home. And just one other aside, unfortunately, my friend is the reason that Naperville has a 30-day ban. She owned a house in the area pretty close to downtown, definitely walkable. She bought the smaller house next to hers and decided to completely renovate it, convert it into an Airbnb, and started renting it out, had no problems for quite a while, and then rented it out to an elderly woman who actually turned out not to be an elderly woman and in fact was a young 20-something person from Chicago, had a huge party, which resulted in the police coming out. It was very difficult for them to control. People were urinating all over their neighborhood. There was a gun involved. There was a stabbing in West Chicago, actually, where a similar situation happened. And because of that, their neighbors decided that this will never happen in their neighborhood again. And so the whole city of Naperville now has a 30-day restriction on that. So kind of to your point, like it's not a problem until it's a really big problem. And that's why you see West Chicago. I was surprised that West Chicago would have such restrictions. And then I looked into it, and it was because there was, again, a large party. They didn't know who it was, who was throwing it. There was a stabbing. And the police ended up having to distribute flyers warning people about these parties and these things happening with Airbnbs. And so I just think more of St. Charles. I think we can do something before we have something like this happen. And so I guess that's just my 2 cents and my experience. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just your first and last name.
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Reback, also in the second ward. Thank you. Jamie has been extremely helpful throughout this whole situation. Also going to just kind of echo what Andrea said, and, you know, our neighborhood is very close-knit. A lot of us have small children. We've grown very close with each other, and it's just very concerning that we've had this in and out of multiple people from different states, different ages. We've had issues with code fences that were not up to code, and unfortunately it took multiple weeks to take care of it. I had to follow up several times because the owners aren't ever home, so they claim that they never received the warning. So what's going to happen when there's a bigger issue and they're not around to receive a warning? Our biggest concern is our children. You know, imposing taxes and all of that can be great and beneficial, but first and foremost, my kids come first. My neighbors' kids come first. Everybody's children should be first. And this is causing a very big stress, not knowing who is next door to us, and there being no regulations for who's in there, how often they can be leaving and coming, and just the fact that there's absolutely no regulations, and we've been unable to receive any answers as to how this is going to be going forward. So I just really hope that you guys take that all into consideration, that we're just very concerned for our children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just your first and last name.
Arthur Lemke, also from the second ward, and I've been following I have a friend that has one of these Airbnbs. It's not in St. Charles, but talk with him periodically about how that goes. And one of the things that was very beneficial was having someone nearby or someone renting part of the building The most severe problem, and it may be similar to what we've seen, is parking, that you could end up having more vehicles than you would normally expect in a residential home, and parking in front of the neighbors' houses without respect to the neighbors' needs to get in and out of driveways. So we have a little bit of this on my street. I've seen that, and they may be not short-term rentals, but we have some disproportionate parking on one of the streets in the subdivision. But for the most severe problem, and I've seen it in one of the regulations, and the one has to do with length of stay. That is, this fellow that, yes, it would be not as well regulated in South Elgin, but he has chosen on his own portion to limit the stays not to short, but if you're going to rent the house, rent it for 3 days. And what that has done is eliminated somebody renting a house for a party, bringing in a lot of cars, bringing in a lot of people, and really upsetting the neighborhood, and obviously then kids and neighbors as well. So if there's one thing that popped out in the ordinances, and you might follow a few, choose a model ordinance and let folks hear up and down, pro and con on some of that ordinance, I would definitely say, and my friend Jeff has had very good experience by saying, if you really only want one night, our fear is you're here to party and to mess up and interrupt the neighbors. That's me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve Leffler here. I'd like to echo what he said. I've traveled all over the world and stayed in Airbnbs, and the quality establishments all kind of put a limit of pretty much 7 days, or at least 5 days. And same with the owners. The quality owners don't want anything less than that. They don't want you sticking around for 2 or 3 days, or 1 day, because of fear of parties. Item number 2 that nobody's really discussed. And I'll give an example. I own a 3-flat in Batavia. I just bought it. It's right over by the library. It's a great location. And I'm trying to figure out what to set the price at for the rental of the units. And I could collect $2,000 a month pretty easily without, on a year-to-year lease. Or I could get $1,000 a week through an Airbnb and double my income. And the effect of that in the neighborhood, if everybody does that who's got a 2 or 3 flat, is to drive up housing prices for people who have to rent, which means that the folks who have to work in the kitchens around here end up moving out to Elgin or Aurora, and they can't stick around here. So just something it could be, you could think it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, but it is an effect, and it's seen in other cities throughout the world too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Brian has.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
So, Russ, there you are. Just a question, you don't have to answer it now, but for the next time we meet, can we get more background specifically why council didn't take action back in 2019, what some of the arguments were, what some of the points of people who were sitting here had, and just so that's helpful for us now.
Yeah, I can provide the information that was presented at that meeting, including the minutes of the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russ.
Just a quick comment. I think it's really telling that in Ward 4, where there were 29 Airbnbs and no complaints, and in Ward 2 and other wards there are complaints. I think that speaks to the opportunity for zoning and how these facilities are perhaps more accepted in the downtown area than in all of the communities. To me, that's a good argument for zoning.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Do you have what you need from us? Sounds like a hotel tax, a registry from the majority up here. Is that kind of a starting point to get us started and go from there?
Yeah, and we can also take a look at potentially some other location-related regulations and see what the impact of that might be on the different wards and specific locations to where these units are to see if there's options that might address some of the concerns that were raised, but also not impact areas where it doesn't seem like it's been a negative.
Yeah, because I don't think, for me, I'm not interested in zoning regulations where it's all going to be concentrated in the fourth ward. I think equities, hang on a second. I think equity is important where it's throughout the entire community. So I don't want the burden to be entirely on the fourth ward. So there's already starting to go into third ward, the fifth ward. So I just want to make sure we're equitable about that and balanced. That's my only point there. So, okay. All right. We're done with that agenda item, so we're going to go on to 4B, recommendation to amending Title 10. Mr. Derek Conley.
All right. Good evening. This is really just formalizing something that City Council actually passed almost exactly 2 years ago, and that would be the Whole Foods Agreement. Part of that agreement was providing some dedicated parking to the Whole Foods customers that are there. The best way to kind of show this is via the map that I have here up on the screen. Can't quite see the whole thing here. There you go. So first and foremost, not the entire lot that is there will be dedicated to Whole Foods customers on the northern end there, which I'll point to it right here. This will remain public parking. That is 31 stalls, and the time limit for public use there would be 2 hours. As you go further south and closer to the Whole Foods building, you have 2 parking lots right here, which we call Lot V, and then to the south, the one adjacent to the Whole Foods building, Lot Y. That will be dedicated parking for Whole Foods customers. I should point out that the property owner of the Blue Goose already did have some of these parking spaces that were dedicated to that building from when the Blue Goose was in business. Of course, when the Blue Goose closed, that has kind of been used for public parking in general, but it actually already was dedicated for that building. Also want to point out that in this ordinance there is a small change here. We did add angled parking along First Street right here. That would be 90-minute parking that previously was parallel street, so we do kind of codify that in our code as well. A few other important parts here. The property owner is actually going to be responsible for the maintenance of the parking lot and the utilities that serve the parking lot, as well as the debris or trash that's floating around in the parking lot and snow removal. So the city will not be responsible for incurring those costs or doing those tasks. With that, I can take any questions.
Mark?
I think the parking restrictions are great. How confident are you that those time limits can be enforced daily?
It is going to be a struggle at the beginning. The Whole Foods lot, and I actually should mention that Whole Foods this week is putting up their Whole Foods parking signs that are on their lot. Okay. Based on that, we are going to be putting up on our public portion our own lots. There's going to have to be a little bit of training here, especially during the day. I've noticed that there are a lot of workers who park in this lot. The good news is during the day there's plenty of space in our parking deck, and people are just going to have to get used to moving over to our parking deck where there's ample parking throughout the day, and you can stay there all day.
Ed?
Derek, in regards to the parking, the private parking lot, that's Whole Foods lot, so they're going to maintain that, snow removal and all that. Will they maintain the blue lots as well? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, they're going to maintain, and they're responsible for the repairs of the public lot as well.
Okay, so all 3 of those lots?
All 3 of these, the northern one included, they will be taking care of that.
And then those 3 lots, I know there's going to be some time restriction, but will people be able to park there overnight?
There will not be able to park there overnight, no.
So there'll be some kind of restrictions in place telling them the same thing?
Yes.
And then we would be responsible for, God forbid, towing those cars, or is Whole Foods just responsible for the private parking area?
Whole Foods has the right to tow on their dedicated spots.
Okay.
Per the agreement, but not the public portion.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Brian, I got one more.
Mark?
This is a little, I don't know if this is the right time for this conversation, and I know I brought it up to Mrs. McGuire, and when we talked, how prepared are we for the 25th in terms of traffic and popularity for the next month? I guess when that opens, I just keep thinking of the first day of school and you get all the parents dropping off the kids in, drop-off pickup lines, which all of us have been through, and it's worse than O'Hare. So I'm trying to figure out what's that going to look like. And you might not have that answer today, but it's a plan getting in place to prepare for this opening.
Yeah, I imagine we are going to do at least some social media posts about the opening, and maybe we can throw in there just available parking in the area and traffic flows. Remind people of also our construction projects that are in the downtown right now to avoid. So, but we can think about some other preventative measures to kind of avoid that.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Moved by Bongard, seconded by Gem. Any other questions, comments? No. Roll call, please.
Sokaitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bungard?
Yes.
Munns?
Yes.
Spellman?
Yes.
Gem?
Yes.
Petrilla?
Yes.
Festner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Okay, that passes. Next, we have item 4C, recommendation to approve amendment number 2 to an intergovernmental agreement between the county and the city of St. Charles.
Yes, this proposed amendment is to an agreement the city has with King County regarding Randall Road north of Main Street. Specifically, this amendment is regarding Randall Road access to the property that's located on the northwest corner of the intersection. It's a long vacant parcel that was last location of a Long John Silver's restaurant. When the intersection was widened in 2006, Randall Road access was removed from the site. Unfortunately, without that direct access, that corner site's remained vacant for the past 20 years. At the time the construction happened, the city and the county were trying to consolidate some of those access points and then direct traffic north to Woodward Drive, which now has a traffic signal on Randall. But this access has not been adequate for the site to be developed. Based on a request from the property owner, in 2020, staff obtained approval from the city council to begin negotiating having this access point restored, but at a further distance from the intersection. And staff presented to the county's transportation committee on a number of occasions over the past 4 years to try and negotiate for this access point. And the agreement that's been reached would allow a right-in or a right-in and right-out access. The right-out access would be a little more complicated because it would require the installation of a median along the Randall Road southbound left turn lanes to prevent traffic from cutting across the lanes. But all of the responsibilities would be all of the improvements would be the responsibility of the property owner or developer. So they may choose to install the simpler right-in if that's desired. The only other term in the agreements regarding the county's transportation impact fee, the city would be agreeing to provide a written notice of the county's fee requirement in all of our building permit applications. This information is now incorporated in our permit applications and development applications. So all applicants are aware of this potential cost, but then they also have the opportunity to work with the county on determining the final fee and any applicable credits in advance. So the city will not be requiring proof of fee payment before releasing permits, just providing a written notice to the applicants. With that, staff's recommending approval.
Thank you, Russell. Any questions, comments?
Munns moves.
Second.
Moved by Munn, seconded by Bongard. Roll call, please.
Sokaitis?
Yes.
Folks? Munns?
Yes.
Gem?
Yes.
Spellman?
Yes.
Petrilla?
Yes.
Festner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Okay, that passes. Public comment? Any additional public comment?
Hey, everybody. Steve Leffler again. As I live right across the street from Whole Foods, I am witnessing what's going on with the parking there every day. And I walk through that lot quite a bit. And there's usually about 40 parking spots that are open. And I'm sure that they're going to have at least 40 employees there. So in my business for 35 years, we had parking plans for all of our stores. And I think we should talk to Whole Foods about asking their people to park in specific places like I did at my business, and have them tell them, okay, the fourth floor in the parking garage would be a great spot for your car. They don't have to adhere to it, but it would help out an awful lot in the downtown area, because people are going to see, they're going to see that it's a Whole Foods parking lot, and they're going to see the sign saying just only for Whole Foods customers, but then they're going to ignore them, and they're going to walk off, and they're going to go over to Kimmer's. So we should do something proactive about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional items from the mayor, council, or staff?
I got two. Sorry.
Ryan, go ahead.
Derek, I have two for you. Do we have, and if I missed it, forgive me, do we have a status update on the study regarding the former PD site?
Yes, staff is continuing to work with the consultant. They have prepared a draft for that, and staff has provided comments, and they are going to be returning that to us. That is something I feel confident that it could be ready to be released sometime this summer.
Okay. And then the other one was back, was it November? I think it was Q4. We met with Charlestown ownership, and they were expected to present us with some data, some numbers. Did they ever turn those in?
They have not submitted a complete document of those numbers. However, they have shared that with staff, at least kind of the high-level figures that they found with that. They are still planning on coming forward to City Council to present something that would be kind of like a site plan, a template site plan that they could shop to developers. And that site plan will kind of be based off of how they think they can minimize the engineering costs that it would take to develop the site.
Do they have a timetable of when they think they might return?
Staff met with their engineers and planners just last Friday. Thought it was a very productive meeting. And they've got that feedback, and I think they're going to resubmit to staff at that level.
Awesome. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that, so what day was it? On Wednesday, we had a meeting where the owners came from California to meet with us. They had a number of other meetings over the period of a couple days. I think, start by saying that they were very gracious and very excited about coming to City Hall. They were excited about the new opportunities. They were very encouraged and very happy, and came in with lots of ideas. And I know that was my first meeting with them, but I will tell you that I walked away after meeting with them being very impressed with how excited they are about presenting a new opportunity, how they're looking forward to coming in front of the Planning Commission and all of you, and that they were just very open to feedback. And I walked away just very, very happy and very, very impressed. Not to say that it's one step and a long step, but they were prepared. They came in, they were ready to work and ready to take feedback. So anything that Heather or Derek has to add to that, but just I thought it was a great first step, and I really appreciated them coming in.
Okay, anyone else?
I have a couple of questions.
Jamie?
Well, first, I just wanted to thank City Administrator McGuire and staff. I had asked for a couple of things to be done regarding door-to-door solicitors, and she helped get some things done like immediately. Some of it, and he's already left, but Art Lemke had brought up something about some solicitations that he had received, but I received some other questions from other residents about that, and they're going to be updating the city website to help residents better understand what their own rights are and how the no solicitor signs work, what that actually protects them from, and potentially, if they can make this work, have a list every month of what solicitors are actually approved and licensed to be coming door to door, to make it easier for people to know who's actually allowed to be at their door. So I appreciate the help for that. I did want to ask if we have gotten any updates, and I don't know if this is for Heather or the mayor, but have we gotten any updates from Bill Roth regarding the requests that have been sent out a few months ago and last month from a resident about Kirk Road? With the kids being out of school and the traffic that's on that road and the request for speed reduction or mitigation there. I don't think I've seen anything from him, but I was just curious if anybody's gotten any responses.
I have to just go back and check, and I can follow up with you on it.
Okay. And then my other question was regarding e-bike ordinances. again, with kids out of school and the volume of complaints that both Alderman Baumgart and I have received, and the volume of these different kinds of vehicles that we're seeing between bikes and e-scooters and these mini bikes that look like itty-bitty motorcycles that are zipping around through neighborhoods with kids that are too young for driver's licenses, so they haven't seen rules of the road. Their parents may not know where they are. They're not wearing helmets. I'm seeing complaints online a lot in other wards too, and I'm just curious if this is something that we can get in front of with some more comprehensive consistency with some neighboring cities or park district regulations and maybe some education.
I think
that
we're
we can look at.
exactly some of those goals that we were trying to hit. So we had some additional information come to us that we wanted to review at a staff level and make some tweaks to that committee presentation that we'd done before we implemented. And then the plan moving forward would be to do a social media campaign, push it out through our newsletters, and do exactly that, some educational pieces on that. So we're hoping to finalize that at staff level and bring that back to City Council.
Okay, that would be great. And then the last thing was also safety related, that I noticed in Geneva, they recently put out an RFP for crossing guard services. And I wondered if that was something that St. Charles could or would be looking at in the future, since I know that we have several crossing guard positions that have never been able to be filled. Like I know Dunham has been an open position for 7 years that we have never been able to fill. And I also know there's a number of soon-to-be retirements, and I didn't know if that was something we would look at.
It is something that we continue to explore. I think that the crossing guard position has become difficult, and I don't want to speak too much for Jen here. I know it's a meeting that we've had several times in the last year, especially because we partner with the school district on so many of those and looking at our other options. Unfortunately, right now, the other options we've had with the companies that do that would be a significant cost increase to us, which is why we haven't gone down that route. Okay. Currently, we've tried to make some small tweaks to hopefully draw in some more applicants to that process before we go down that path, because we know of those vacancies. So trying to keep the cost where it should be. It's just difficult because that position itself, you are requiring a couple hours a day, but you're split on both sides of the day, so it's not a full schedule. So it just becomes difficult to recruit for it. But we are trying to tweak different things to draw in more applicants before we go down that process. But it is something we're aware of.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I have one comment, and I'm going to echo Jamie's comment about the crossing guards, because we have a shortage in the 4th Ward, especially after the redistricting of the boundaries, the school boundaries. A lot of kids are crossing the collector streets,
sure.
3rd Street, Horn Street, Prairie Street, and there are no crossing guards. So just something to look in. I know you just said you're going to look into it, so thank you very much for doing that.
Can I add one thing just
Yeah,
with
go
that?
ahead.
I'm so sorry, I missed one part of the crossing guard portion. Alderman Baumgart and I have an area of our ward where they've learned that they will no longer get busing in the fall, and it is at an intersection that we are also receiving complaints about speeding and an unprotected intersection that may or may not end up qualifying for a stop sign or some other type of traffic mitigation. And they will not be receiving any support from the school district regarding crossing guards or anything for K through 5 students that will be crossing from Kingswood, from Kingswood to walk what is 1.5 miles, or I guess just underneath that, according to their GPS, to Norton Creek. And so that is another piece of that I think I'm concerned about, is if we can find ways to assist with that and to work better with the school district regarding that. That burden being on us is also a little concerning to me, that they don't share in that requirement from a cost perspective.
And we do have a certain number of crossing guards that are designated that the school does pay for. It's just not all of them. There's a little bit of a split with it. So.
Yeah, and I understand that they're worried about the transportation costs for this, but these are, 5-year-olds. So I'm so sorry. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I think we're good. So item 7, we're going to be going into executive session, so we're going to have to clear the room out. So to discuss personnel. So I'll need a motion and a second.
Yeah. So moved.
Moved by Gem. Seconded by Folks. We need a roll call.
Kulkaitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bungard?
Yes.
Muntins?
Yes.
Ginn?
Yes.
Spellman?
Yes.
Petrilla?
Yes.
Gessner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Okay.